Morning, everybody.
Morning.
As many of you guys know, my wife and I, right after college, had the crazy idea to leave the United States and move to South America, to the country of Ecuador. We were young, we were newly married, we had no clue what we were doing, we didn't speak the language well, and we moved to a city of about 4 million people. And it was the city of Guayaquil. It's filled with beautiful people, but it was not a beautiful city. As a matter of fact, they kind of called that part of Ecuador the armpit, of Ecuador, where Guayaquil was. When we got there, there had been a trash strike, and so there were just mounds of trash in the streets with rats. It was super hot. We would say they had two seasons, their hot season and their super hot season, their rainy season. There's no green areas. Everything's just brown and cement. Any open areas is just dirt. So you're either seeing a few trees, but no green areas anywhere. Crime was super high, and every building was built right against the other, and every door had an outer metal door, and then around your property you had a big cement wall with broken glass on top or barbed wire because of the level of crime. And we got there as a young couple, and we were faced with a situation because our team, I worked with a team of 5 other families, and we were meeting for worship one Sunday. And while we were meeting for worship, somebody had broken into one of our teammates' homes and robbed them. And when I said robbed them, they cleaned them out. They had a new puppy, puppy's gone. They stole the puppy. They stole everything they had. And that got me thinking about, my house. We lived in a house that we didn't even have an outside wall yet. And all we had was this metallic frame. And then we had this wooden door that wouldn't quite latch properly, and I hadn't installed a proper lock on it. And so we would shut the wooden door, but it wouldn't lock, and I hadn't fixed it. And then we'd shut the metal door, and we would put 2 locks on it, and then a third lock. So we had 3 locks on it. And the next Sunday, because I was really feeling for my teammates, I was in charge of leading worship. And so I did this whole sermon on Job and how we handle, adversity, without knowing at that precise moment our house was being broken into and everything, they were stealing. But before I knew that, on Friday, I had gone to an insurance company in town, and I said, I need an insurance policy. And so I filled out the paperwork. We did an itemization of everything. I paid. They gave me a receipt. And they said, come back on Monday and we'll give you the policy. That was on Friday. On Sunday, our home was broken into. So I called one of our teammates, and he knew a guy who was an insurance adjuster, and he called him over before I called the company. And the guy looked, and he says, oh, you don't have an outside wall. I'm like, no. And he says, okay, so you can see they broke in here, the wooden door. There's no marks on the wooden door because I didn't put a lock on the wooden door. It didn't shut and lock. And he's like, oh, and then he said, so how long have you had your insurance policy? I said, 2 days. And you could just see him look at me like this is a setup, like you did this intentionally. And I'm like, no, this is just, our teammates were robbed, and so I did this. And so I said, what do I do? He says, it's very simple. Very simple. Here's what you do. You do nothing for 1 week. And then next Sunday, you call and report that your house was broken into and robbed, and that's all you say. And you call your insurance company. And I'm a new missionary. I'm a religious leader. I've left my home and country to come and tell people how they should live out their lives with God, how they should stand up for what is right. And I looked at him, and basically, he's asking me not to do that. And so I look at my teammate, who's our team leader, and who has a little more experience than I do, and I said, man, what should I do? And he looks at me, and he's like, look, this is a different world. We're not back in the United States. I just do what he says. It's not your fault. And the guy's trying to convince me, hey, this isn't on you. You didn't do anything wrong. This isn't your fault. And in a moment of courageous, conviction, I said, I will not. I'm not going to do this. And so I called my insurance company, and they're going to send an adjuster up. And so I had to wait 3 or 4 hours for him to come. And I was so proud of myself. I'm able to say to my team, no, this is how you take a stand. But as I'm waiting, I'm looking at that wooden door with no locks. that doesn't shut. And I just keep looking at it like, what's he going to say? Is he going to look for an out? Like, they're going to try and not pay me. This guy already told me they're not going to try and pay you. I mean, be honest. You took out a policy on Friday and you were robbed on Sunday. He's not going to pay you. And I'm looking at that, and I made my courageous stand. And a couple hours in, I grabbed a hammer, and I just attacked that wooden door. I attacked it. I hit the knob. I splintered the wood. And the insurance adjuster comes, and I don't say a word. I just say, I didn't say they broke that door. I just didn't say. And they still didn't want to pay me, and so I sat in their office for 5 days straight, 8 hours a day. And I said, I'm not leaving till you pay me. Not leaving till you pay me. And on the 5th day, they paid me, I don't know how many times you've had to stand up. Our series this week is on Daniel, and I think Phil does this on purpose. He comes up with a wonderful series idea. Then he finds a subject he doesn't want to touch, and he says, hey, do you want to preach? And so I was like, Daniel, I'll preach. I love Daniel. Let's go. And then I started looking at this passage. And I'm like, I don't want to teach on this. Last week, he taught about how, as Christians, we're to stand out. We're to swim against the current. We're to be different. We're to look different. And next week, it's going to be about how you can stand strong when you're weak. Man, I would have loved that one. Like, that would have been great. This week, it's standing up for what is right. It is standing up for what is right. And right now in history, there's a lot of people standing up. I don't know if you've noticed. Like, the whole world is standing up about something. Black Lives Matter is standing up about racial inequality and racial injustice, and now they're going through their own issues as an organization, And then you have people in Canada now who are on the border standing up, and you have anti-maskers who are standing up, and then you have the maskers, standing up, and you've got everybody standing up, and I just personally kind of want to take a knee. Like, I'm tired of this type of standing up. Not that it's not important to stand up. Like, we should stand up for what we believe. But when we talk about Christians standing up, Phil said it last week, man, we are so known for what we don't agree with and not for what we actually like and appreciate and love. If you go on to Google, I've said this before, if you go to Google and you start to type, why are Christians so? Look at the suggestions that come up. You're not going to find, why are Christians so loving? Why are Christians so filled with hope? Why are Christians so... No, you don't get that at all. It's the exact opposite. So this sermon's hard for me because we're talking about confrontation. We're talking about standing up and confronting people. And even our example is a type of confrontation that I don't want to use because I want to take this very real and personal. We're looking at Daniel. This is one of 5 in this series, moments in Daniel's life, focused on taking a stand or standing in some way. And it's standing up, and so he goes before a king, and he stands up and proclaims the truth. And even though that's the focus, I want to get off of that global, macro level of standing up. Because Facebook people are standing up. I only post about work now on Facebook pretty much. I'm just done with it. All my friends are standing up. Everybody's standing up, and they're angry, and they're standing up. I want to take it to a personal level because it's easy to talk about this injustice and that injustice and not look at your own life. It's easy to tell society all the ways they need to change, but don't call me on my own changes. Don't talk to me about that. I want to talk about standing up for what's right, not on the macro level. And I'm not even saying you shouldn't. We should be engaged. We should be involved, right? I want to take it personal. I want to bring it down. When's the last time that you had to stand up to somebody in your inner circle? Or stand up to yourself and have hard conversations? I remember being told as a kid, and I'll change the language because it wouldn't be appropriate here, but my stepdad said, son, you can pick your friends, but you're stuck with your family. You can choose your friends, but you're stuck with your family. I look back at the story. Remember Cain and Abel, the first family? You know, we call him the first family. After Cain kills his brother, what question does God ask him? Where's your brother? And do you remember Cain's response? Am I my brother's keeper? What do you think the answer to that is? Yes. Yes. I am my brother's keeper. I mean, if you're part of the family, families take care of each other. That's what they're supposed to do. So say it with me. Yes, I am my brother's keeper. Yes, I am my brother's keeper. When you join the family in the body of Christ, you are uniting yourself with a family. It's a family that you have voluntarily said, I'm going to not only attend church, but become part of a family. There's certain responsibilities that there. And it's a complicated subject. Family works together, they play together, they fight together, they rejoice together, they weep together. They don't just take off like the prodigal son when things get tough. And when we define it that way, and I look at churches today and churches I've been a part of, man, I don't really see church as family. Church is an option that I can join when I want, and if I don't like something, well, I'll just find another family. But it's not intended to be that way, is it? Like especially in the world we live in, we are Christ followers. We understand not everybody else has chosen this path. Most people aren't. Most people aren't going to believe like we do. They're not going to live like we do. They're not going to see the world like we do. And we don't get angry and we don't get enraged. We understand. This is who we are. You know? This is who we are. We're a family. We just don't walk away. And as a family, there are times when you have to be brutally honest with one another. And man, is that difficult. The other reason I didn't want to do this is I'm not particularly good at confrontation. I'm not. I thought I was, until I had to lead an organization, and suddenly I find out I can be very passive aggressive. Like, I'm okay with confrontation if I can see it coming, okay, there is this issue, and then I'll pray about it, I'll think about it, and I'll come with strategies. I'm going to meet with this person. I think I may take this approach or that approach. I'll talk to Nisha. But man, when it just happens, boom, it does not go well. I find out I am not as wise as I thought I was, you know. So this sermon is kind of difficult. There's a guy, Mike Breen, he was an Anglican priest, and he went to a church that was not doing well in England, and then it became this big church. Then he moved to America, and he repeated it. He's written a lot about discipleship, and he studied discipleship and the art of being discipled and growing in your faith. And he said, there are two types of churches out there. The tendency are two things. Both things are needed, but a lot of churches only focus on one. He says, if you want to be a church that makes a difference, then two things need to be in place. And he says there are churches that do one of the things right, and that is high challenge. And he makes this graph, high challenge. There are churches who are high challenge. You go to those churches, they tend to be big. They have a vision, they have a direction, they have charismatic leadership. You plug into their system and they're going to go. They have, if you're willing to jump on board and adopt their vision, you have a path, to the future. You know what you're doing. You're excited. The problem with the high challenge is they don't have that other element sometimes. And that is a high invitation to relationship. High invitation to relationship. What does that mean? That means you're not just part of an organization that has goals and you're all working together. You actually have friendships. You actually have people in your life who are walking with you. You have relationships where you are known and your junk is known. And he says, unfortunately, a lot of these churches that are high challenge but low invitation to relationship, it works well until it doesn't. Until you either question something that's happening in the church, or you go through a crisis and realize there's nobody there that really cares. And if you're not on board, well, then they just find somebody else who is. There's not those ties that are there. On the other end, he said, though, and this he says is a lot of evangelical churches, they are high invitation to relationship. We do small groups, and we're very loving, we're very kind, and we do, meals, and we do this, but they don't really challenge. It's all focusing on the love of Christ and the grace of God, and you do a lot of things together, but there's also a lot of just letting things slide. And there's no, hey, I've noticed this. What's going on here? Why are you doing this? You know this doesn't please God? Or I notice, you mentioned that your family is having all these financial issues. Let's talk about that. And a lot of these churches that are the high invitation to relationship, they'll say, oh, our discipleship is in our small groups. But what he found is he actually talks to them. No, what they mean is they may talk about something complicated, but then the next week they're on to the next subject. There's nobody ever saying, oh, you mentioned you kind of struggle with lust and porn. There's no meeting during the week. Hey, you talked about this. Tell me more about that. What's going on there? What are you going to do about this? You know it's not good. I know it's not good. I'm here to help you. I'm not here just to love you and pat you on the back. I'm here to say, hey, what's going on? How do we go to God and together come with a plan to fix this? You got to have both those things. And the truth is, each of you will probably reside on one of those spectrums. I'm a challenge person. Like I take challenges. Give me a challenge and I'm all about it. I find it a lot harder, the relational, walking with people and being there. I like doing my own thing. I'm pretty good. I know what I'm good at. Let me do that, kind of isolated. Right? As a matter of fact, if you think about who you are, there's a whole nother graph we could use, not about discipleship, and we've done this before. There are certain people who are predisposed to being gracious. We'll call them grace people. Grace people are, especially within Christianity, they're loving, they're kind, they seek peaceful outcomes, they try to make things work, they're very compassionate, very merciful. The problem is that God is those things, but he's not only those things. God is also just and righteous and holy and pure. And he says, I want you to be holy just as I am holy. What in the world? How can I be holy as God is holy? So for some of you, you're grace people. And just to let you know, I'm a grace person. That's just if I can make it work, like if I can make you, the way you live your life, your lifestyle, your beliefs work, I'll try to make it work. Like I'll try to fit you in. But that causes problems because Jesus says, my lane is very narrow. You can try and fit people in, but it's not a wide lane. But there's some of you who are more truth people. You're truth people. You care about the truth. Not that I don't care about the truth, but you resonate. You're very logical. You see things black and white. We use terms in church as prophetic. I'm more prophetic. You tend to be more outspoken. You care deeply about justice and what is right and what is wrong. And you, frankly, get kind of ticked off at the grace people, especially if you're in a grace church, because you're like, when are we finally going to get around to talking about the truth? We got all these people here living in sin. You know what you're doing. I know what you're doing. Nobody talks about it. Why is nobody talking about this, And so you have some grace people in truth. How many of you feel like you're kind of on the grace side? Raise your hand. How many are truth people? Truth people. Afraid to raise your hand? No. You wouldn't be, right? When it comes to standing up and confronting people, man, there are a couple of extremes. Some of you who are truth people are like, yes, I'm so glad he's doing this sermon. Like it's about time somebody stands up and we tell people it's kind of like giving you a whiskey and a loaded gun. It's like, all right, let's go, There are two extremes. And this is the longest introduction to Daniel that you will ever hear. The first extreme is this. Just because of your makeup, some are just unwilling to front. My wife just rolls her eyes at me. If I'm nervous about something, I get an email from somebody or a letter that I think is bad, I won't open it for like a week. And she's like, so-and-so sent you a letter. Yeah, I have no idea what it says. Because I don't want bad news. I know this is going to be bad news. And eventually I click it and I'm always like, oh, that's not so bad. I don't like confrontation. I don't like it. But you're not loving somebody if you're not willing to step into their lives and call them on their stuff. That's not love. It's not. We know this when we say things like, not our business. Not my business. It's not me. I see it. It's part of my family, but it's not my business. We say it through live and let live, you know. Well, who am I to judge? That's a great one. Who am I to judge? Yeah, the Bible says don't judge. Actually read that passage. It's not saying don't judge. It says before you judge somebody else, you better have judged yourself. It's not saying don't judge. It's saying you need to judge. Just know how you should do that, right? We are to judge. But, and so then you have the other extreme. And these are, some confront, but they're so eager about it, they do it like their motivations are just, it's like drive-by shootings, drive-by confrontations. You know, there are people that exist, and they tend to be, not always, you know, the truth people. I've got the truth, and I'm just going to tell it like I see it. You know, there's an expression in Spanish. We had this from one of our dear friends in a church in Ecuador. She was charismatic. She was an influencer. She was a servant. Nobody in the church worked harder, and she angered so many people. It was just like constant conflict. If there was a tea named after her, it'd be constant conflict. Any of you tea drinkers will get that joke. And she would say, so I'm just like a stick of dynamite. You know, they say, no tengo pelos en la lengua. I don't have hair on my tongue. Like, I just say it like I see it. And she'll explode, and then right after she's fine. She's like, yeah, I always explode, but you'll see me the next day. I'm fine. And I'm just like, but nobody else is fine. Everybody else is wounded and hurting. This is not acceptable. So when we talk about, man, we got to stand up. I want to take it personal. I'm not talking about Facebook. I'm not talking about politics. I'm talking about in your personal life with your own family members and your church family, your friends and your coworkers that you are intimately involved with. Those type of stand-up moments are difficult. I mean, they are. The messenger is oftentimes shot. So there are these two extremes. So now, two extremes. And remember, when I talked about grace and truth, do you remember the description of Jesus and how he came into the world? He came into the world in grace and in truth. The power of the gospel is not just saying, well, I'm a grace person, I just love everybody, everything's good, or we need to tell it like it is. The power of the gospel comes from within that tension, like a rubber band. A rubber band only works when it's stretched out in intention. It is walking grace and truth together. That's what we're called to do. But it's not easy at all. And so we see Daniel. This is chapter 4. And we're coming to a passage where we see King Nebuchadnezzar, which we last week Phil said if you say Nebuchadnezzar, you need to boo. Just remember that. Bad guy, right? Here is a king that reigned for 40 years. He built an entire empire after the Assyrians. He created one of the wonders of the world, the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. Do you know Saddam Hussein? Actually, that was his hero. You know, that was Saddam Hussein's hero, and he wanted to be like Nebuchadnezzar. He wanted to restore, you know, this kingdom. And he conquered Jerusalem twice. He went into God's chosen people in their chosen land, destroyed their temple, and then he took, 10,000 of their wealthiest and leaving only a poor behind, destroying their temple, and took them in exile to his kingdom. And that's where we find Daniel. Do you know last week when we talked about Daniel and the way that he and his friends were going to eat differently, to stand apart. They were going to stand out. Scholars speculate that he was in his teens. He was a young teenager. This is not a man. And by the time we get to this interpretation of the second dream that Nebuchadnezzar has, he's 50 years old, 45 to 55 years of age. Here is a man who as a boy saw his country destroyed, their temple destroyed, taken away like a slave to a distant land, renamed. And then you live in fear all of your life. He's now 45, 50, 55 as a Jew in exile. He does not belong to this people. These are your conquerors. And this is what Daniel is facing. And I think it's interesting to look at. And I want to say this before we go deep into this. Life Church is a family, and it's a growing family. So many new people, faces have shown up, and new things are happening. There is a leadership team that meets once a month. I don't know if we have of some of the different members. These are the people who are on the leadership team at Life Church. We meet once a month, and we talk about you. Not really. We're once a month to come together and to pray and discern, how do we know the will of God for this church? How do we know what we stand for? What does it look like to have both walking together and loving people, but challenging them as well? How do we challenge each other? With the new people coming in, decisions have to be made. How do we know that we're going to make the right decisions? And so we meet every month trying just to get to know ourselves better, trying to talk about what does it mean to have God lead this church. I mean, we're trying to look at the church and to look at you as family members. And so as we come together, if there's a situation in church or a question, we bring it up and say, hey, do you know, this is a situation going on. How can we pray? What can we do? We are trying to lovingly know how to walk the line between grace and truth. And we would appreciate your prayers. But I think God wants that. So Daniel, we come back to Daniel. In chapter 4, Nebuchadnezzar has a dream. And the thing about Nebuchadnezzar, he is pagan. But he makes declarations in different moments of his life that are such powerful declarations about who God is. He's like the pagan who then comes to his senses and says, oh, I've now see there's only one God, and this is who God is, and this is who I'm going to serve. And then 10 minutes later, he's off doing his own thing again, right? And he has this dream, and he doesn't understand this dream at all. And he goes to his magicians and his interpreters, and he says, what does this mean? And I like what I heard one preacher say. He said, it's not that they necessarily couldn't understand the prophecy. I just don't think they wanted to, because his dream was pretty apparent. Like to stand up and tell the king that, oh, this is about you. You're going to lose your whole empire. You're going to be cut off. You're going to be cut down. Nope, not going to do it. I'm going to let some other prophet do that. I'm at the mercy of the king. So the king then comes back. This is the second interaction with Daniel and dreams that he's had. So he calls Daniel forward. And so let's go ahead and look at this. Let's see. Here's my dream. And so when he talks about the dream, he sees a large tree growing out of the middle of the earth. It's growing tall and strong. It's reaching to the heavens. It's giving fruit to everybody. It's giving shade to animals and shade to the people of the earth. It is a blessing to everybody's birds are nesting in its branches. But then he says, I see a holy one from heaven coming down, and he scatters his fruits. He chases the animals from its shade. He cuts down this huge, influential tree, but leaves a stump. And it says that later there's let's not get into that just yet. I want you to look at verse 19. When he tells this dream to Daniel, also called Belteshazzar, in verse 19, look at what he said. He was greatly perplexed for a time. Now, is he greatly perplexed because he doesn't understand it? Or is he greatly perplexed because he doesn't know what to say? Kind of like me with am I going to tell the insurance people, yeah, this happened today when it really happened a week. Like, do I do this or do I not? I don't know. But I think it's important to recognize, man, Daniel just didn't have the snap judgment. He was greatly perplexed for a time, and his thoughts terrified him. You don't think the king looks at the exiles always with suspicion? Or do you have this notion that somehow the exiles now had just become part of the kingdom and Nebuchadnezzar trusts them and loves them and sees them as his own, having his own best wit? Nope. But he's come to David because he's going out of his mind, and David's thoughts are terrified. And let me tell you, it takes courage to confront somebody. I mean, who am I? That's the first thing that comes into my mind. Like, who am I to confront anybody? Especially if they're bigger or they're better. or they know more, or they're more powerful, or they're better with words. One of the things I've recognized with my wife is cannot argue. Like, our kids will defeat her every time. And I, coming from the background I come from, you don't argue with your mother, you just do it. Like, that to me is just, you're going to argue? And she actually tries to explain to them what she wants and why she wants it. And they will out-argue her she's not built that way, right? But there comes times when we have to stand up and confront. And so he goes to interpret dreams. Now, I don't know, how many of you are dreamers? Raise your hand if you're dreamers. You have lots of dreams. My wife rarely has dreams. If she has them, she doesn't remember them. I have dreams almost every night, and I remember most of them. You know, or at least I remember what I remember, and every night I have dreams and I remember them, and I always wake up and want to tell Nisha, and she's over it, you know, because they're phenomenal. But if you look up online interpretations of dreams, here's what's said. They're common interpretations. If you're falling, if you're in a dream and it's a falling dream, that means there's something you can't control. That's what they say. If you're forgetting an exam, you're in school or there's an exam and you've totally forgotten, that just means you don't feel prepared. If you're stuck, like you're stuck in a situation you can't escape, can't get out, you're overwhelmed. If your dream, they say, involves dirty water, that means you're probably sick. If you dream about chocolate, that means you deserve to be rewarded. So somebody says. So says the internet. If you have to go to the bathroom, it probably just means you have to go to the bathroom. I've learned from that. If you dream that you're naked, that means you're insecure, you know. All these interpretations, it wasn't until I went to the mission field and I began to work with missionaries in Eastern countries. And so many Muslims come to Christ, not through preaching or teaching, but through dreams. Where in their dreams, Jesus appears. Dreams can be powerful things. I don't buy into all the other, things, interpretation as much. But dreams are important, and in this time, it was definitely important in this culture. And so David, the first thing that David says, and this is what's important about confrontation. He says this, King, O King, I wish this applied to your enemies. This is the king that has destroyed your people. This is a king that has captured you, trafficked you into his kingdom. This is a king that you should despise and hate. And I don't think he's being disingenuous or dishonest here. King, O king, I wish this applied to your enemies. I wish this was not true of you. When we confront people, man, if I confront somebody in my inner circle, if it's with my family member, if it's one of you at some point, and we have to have a difficult talk, I want that to be my spirit. Like, I don't want to be there to tell you, finally I get to tell you what I think, indignant. I want it to have a different tone. And then he says, Your Majesty, you are that tree. Become great and strong. Your greatness has grown until it reaches the sky, and your dominion extends to distant parts of the earth. And then he gives the interpretation. This is it. Verse 25, you'll be driven away from people, and you will live with wild animals. You will eat grass like the ox and be drenched with the dew of heaven. 7 times, some say years, will pass by for you until you acknowledge that the Most High is sovereign over all kingdoms on earth and gives them to anyone he wishes. The command to leave the stump of the tree with its roots means that your kingdom will be restored to you when you acknowledge that heaven rules. How many years do you think you would have probably dreamt of being to stand up before this dictator and be able to tell him off? Like, what joy and satisfaction would you have to your accuser, your enemy, to finally stand up and tell it like it is? I don't get this from this reading. I don't understand it. Daniel, he could gloat. He could have his moment and say, this is my stand, kind of like Gandalf on the bridge. You will not pass, and he hits it down. That would be my moment to really get at it. I don't know. That's not the impression that I get. So he interprets the dreams, and he could have stopped there. He could have just said, this is what it means. There you go. But he doesn't. If you notice, Daniel had the courage to go beyond that. He says, King Nebuchadnezzar, accept my advice. He's interested in something more than just correction. Stop sinning and do what's right. Break from your wicked past and be merciful to the poor. Perhaps then you will continue to prosper. Sometimes the hardest thing to do is tell somebody to stop. And yet it's the most loving and courageous thing that you can do. And it's nothing new. This whole exercise, the story that we're seeing of confrontation, I said we're going to take it personal. It takes courage. But our motivation when we confront anybody is because we actually want what's best for them. We want to see change, not for change itself, but because it reflects your heart. Otherwise, it's just behavior modification. That's all it is. Act this way. God doesn't care about your actions if he doesn't have your heart. So you go to church, big deal. If you don't love God, what's it matter? You believe this is right and this is wrong, okay. But if you don't love God from your heart, what's it matter? You profess all these beliefs, but you come together. Do you really love each other? Are you willing not just to attend, but say, I'm going to be part of this family, even though it's weird and it may not be the prettiest, and it's, but I'm committed. I'm committed to this family. And when I see something that needs to change, I'm not just going to get angry and take a stand. I'm going to prayerfully and lovingly share. And this is replicated in Galatians 6. Look at this verse. Paul writes, Dear brothers and sisters, if another believer is overcome by sin, you who are godly should what? Gently and humbly help that person back onto the right path. And be careful not to fall into the same temptation yourself. When you're going to confront, if you see something, we had to say this with our staff. Some of our students, I run a gap year program with young adults, they're confiding in some of our workers. It's a big trust thing. Well, then later it comes up, some of these conversations, and I had to tell our workers, whoa, why didn't you tell us? You don't have the right to hold that. Oh no, but they confide in me. That's not how it works. We don't want to know everything. But if you really love them and you know this is happening and it's damaging them, you can't keep that to yourself. You have to bring it to us. It's the only way we're going to be able to help members of our team and our family. And so those who are godly should do it. So sometimes you may think I need to confront. I see this. Maybe you're not the godly person to do it. Because what we're wanting, isn't it, is reconciliation. That's what we want. We want to see something change. So it's not even about you seeing it, you have to confront it. Nope. I know Matthew 18, if you see somebody in sin, you go. But here we have another exception. Find somebody that you believe has a better chance of maybe making that happen. You who are godly, but the way that you do it, humility. I get all up in arms. I see what's happening in our culture and a whole lots of things, and I immediately feel this spirit rise up of I'm tired of it. They just don't listen. I believe this. And I start to I'm not the person who should go to those people and talk to them. So it's talking about something. So here's one of the prayers that I would like us as a family as we walk together. Number one, God, help me connect with the goal of restoration. If our team of leaders at Life Church talks about a situation in the church that needs to be addressed, I pray that we'll have the wisdom to say, okay, who among us needs to go? Who would be the best person who would have the most heard voice with this particular person or this situation? You all have our support, but because we're looking for restoration, we're not looking to be right. So God, help me confront with the goal of restoration. Gently and humbly help that person back onto the right path. But then number two, there's a caution there. You know, when great leaders fall, it's not their sin that shocks people. What angers people is just the hypocrisy. And maybe that's a reason we don't want to confront, because we don't want to be called hypocritical about our own stuff. But I have seen time and time again people confront in anger on issues, and then you discover elements in their life that were the exact same things. The most judgmental people are the ones that sometimes need the most judgment. So God, help me confront with caution. Be careful not to fall into the same temptation yourself. When you're confronting people, you can be very vulnerable to pride, because I'm telling you what I see and what you think should change. We see ourselves as above and others below. We are all below God. And because I know of my own weaknesses, when I do confront, it's hopefully not with a sense of pride to be that way. I hope it's with, man, hey, I don't have all my stuff together. Why this is a journey and why God is with us. And he put us together to help each other, you know. And as a church, I said we have a leadership team that meets together, and we're looking at how to do this. If you really want this church to be your family and not just a place you attend for good messages and feeling an injection of encouragement each week, you've got to do life with people. You've got to, you got to make connections. And especially for younger people, the big lament is, man, I wish people would just reach out. I'm looking for a mentor. I'm looking for, you may go to a church that's not very accepting. Well, then butt in. Like, say, I'm not willing just to attend. I want to be part of this. And the best way that we have for you to be part of that is joining a small group. It's the only way. Otherwise, you just show up and you smile and you say hello, God bless you, and you sing a little and you go home, right? We want this to be a family. And I don't know if any of you have not made this family or you're not wanting to commit to a small group. Just know that if you want the full benefits of what it means to walk together, to cry together, to laugh together, to share together, to walk together, covered in the dust of your rabbi Jesus, it requires you to invest. And it takes time, And we want to encourage you to do that. Here's what I want to finish up with this morning. Even when you do it lovingly and with the right aim in mind, it doesn't always work out. David told him exactly what's going to happen, that you're going to go crazy. This dream's about you. You're going to go crazy, and you're going to be living out with the animals for 7 years until you come to the conclusion that there is only one true God and you're going to serve him. It says a year later, 1 year after he interprets the dream, and he responded at that moment, yes, yes. A year later, he totally forgot it, and he was cast out. And that whole thing came to fruition until he had another come to God moment and was restored. One of the most painful things, and this is where confrontation is also cultural. We had a couple, and I'll end with this. We had a couple show up to one of our churches in South America, and we actually knew them. And they came, and they were difficult. They were difficult people. It was obviously they came to our church because they wanted to be part of something, but man, they were so contrarian. It's like whenever we'd say everybody stand, they would be in the back and they would sit, literally. Or if everybody sat, they would stand up and just stand in the back. They had comments about everything. He knew a lot. He knew a lot. So he really impressed a lot of our people because he just knew so much more Bible. And he was just very, prophetic. And he would say this and say that. And they just looked so miserable. I would watch them every Sunday. They're not making any friends. They sit there and I'm just like, why are you here? I felt bad for them. I'm like, we can't do this. And when I'm having people come in, man, have you met these people? They're just really harsh and really hard. So I did, as a young missionary, I invited them to the house. And I brought them into my office. I said, hey, you guys have been coming to our church. I want you to know how much I'm appreciative of that. And I love you guys. And and I want this to work. And I just want to be honest with you. We're all different. I don't know about you, what your strengths or weaknesses are. So then I started with me. Like I'd really thought this out. And I went through a whole list. Here's some of my positive qualities. Boom, boom, boom. But man, here's where I really need some work. So I try to put myself, as a humble position. And then I said, I've noticed some things about you guys, and I just want to share them with you. I'm not God. Maybe I'm wrong. I'm just going to share with you, and I'd written it all out for each one of them, the man and the wife. And I'm going to start with us. And I said, so I want you to receive this, not as if it's from God. I'm not God. Maybe I'm wrong. I just want to talk you through this, give it to you. I'm not asking for you to respond. Just take it home and pray about it. And let's meet in a couple weeks. And just see, and maybe you'll say, you're exactly right, Chris. We're going to, or maybe you'll say, we think you're wrong. Okay, hands off. Like, I'm not God, And so they're like, okay. And so I started with the man. I'm like, man, this, and we've seen this, and man, my heart aches for you, and this, and this, and this. And when I was all finished with him, then I turned to the wife, and I said, this is what this, and this, and this. Like, I had a list, like a long list. And they were like very appreciative. And I was so nervous. I'd prayed before that. I probably even fasted. And they left, and I told them, man, fantastic. Like, it couldn't have gone better. 2 weeks later, invite him into my office. He's visibly shaking with rage. And he said, you are no Christian. The Holy Spirit is not in you. You are filled with evil. And we will never step foot in your, because in the Spanish culture, you do not. In the Latin culture, you do not directly confront people like that. What I had done in front of his wife was totally emasculate him, totally disrespected him. It was a totally uncultured thing because in Latin America, it's an indirect culture. You go through a third party. And I'm just scratching my head, but no, Matthew 18 says you go directly if you see somebody that's in you, and that's what I did. And we hammered Latins about that. Americans, missionaries, we'd hammer Latin Americans. You need to confront Matthew 18. They come to me about somebody. I haven't seen it. Have you gone to them? Nope. Well, then you go to them. Nope. We're not going to do that. And I just hammered Matthew 18 till one of the Ecuadorian pastors came to me and was like, I just got to be honest with you. Why do you hammer Matthew 18 to the exclusion of other passages? Like as it says, because it says this. And he says, yeah, but what did God do when he had a problem with man? Didn't he send an intermediary? Didn't he send a third party? And it opened up my whole perspective on a different way of managing conflict. What I'm telling you today is there's not only one way. Some of you should not be the one person to go when you see something in somebody else's life. But you do have to go to somebody. I don't know what your tie is with Life Church today. I don't know if maybe you're just visiting and you like it, and I think that's great. We want you here. But I want you to know it's not just about coming together and having a nice time and proclaiming certain things. Being a Christian doesn't cost you anything. It costs Jesus everything, right? It's not based on what we do that makes us a Christian. It's because of what Jesus did. And we've invited him, come into my life and forgive me, and I'm forgiven. But being a disciple costs you everything because it's not easy. It's easy to say love people. It's not easy to love people. It's easy to say do this, be that, do that, until you look at your own life and realize, I'm not this, I'm not that. And the Proverbs say, as iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another. That's what we want to do. That's what we're here for. And if you're willing to do that, we have places for you to do that. Primarily through our small groups, but it doesn't have to be through that. If you want somebody into your life, join a small group, contact Phil, contact any of our leaders, contact anybody. Begin just determining, I'm going to butt in. Even if I don't find a place, I'm going to make a place for me. Because that's where you have this blend of where we're able to stand up for what's right to make our lives, our community's life, and our section of this world a better place. Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, I thank you for today. God, I know there are areas in each of our lives where we are really struggling to live up to the image of what we have, of what we should be. There's some here today struggling and are so exhausted and tired because of either bitterness or a specific sin that they just can't seem to shake, no matter how hard they try. God, I pray that you would motivate them based on this message to seek somebody out to say, hey, I don't want to carry this by myself anymore. I want to be true. I want to be open. And this is a community I'm willing to risk that with. God, I know that maybe we've tried to confront, maybe with the best motives, but maybe we've damaged relationships. Maybe we've rested too much in what we think our gifts are, and this is just the way I am, and this is my gift. But we've done it, we haven't been able to flesh it out in a loving way. For all of the truth people who are in this church, I pray that they would remain who they are in that area of truth, but that they would grow in grace in ways that are incomprehensible. And for all the grace people who are here who are so loving and gracious, may they grow in truth so that they understand that you are a righteous and holy God. And that following you requires sacrifice. It requires letting go. It requires loving people not just enough to accept them as they are, but to love them so much you're not willing to allow them to continue as they are. But I thank you for this example from Daniel, who had every right in that moment to stand up defiantly before this tyrant and gloat about his upcoming destruction. And yet this man did not do it. He sought out what was best. He desired true repentance from his biggest adversary. God, I pray that you would help those of us who may struggle with judgment or pride or this focus on being right or doing the right things. So we offer up today, our leadership offers up, our members of Life Church offers up all of our lives before you, and we ask that you would give us the strength, give us the wisdom we need, not just to love people and be welcoming and inviting people to walk with us, but to challenge people and to know how to do that in a holy, pleasing, loving way, independent of the response. Amen.
Let's stand and sing and